To me, it's kind of like a basketball team. The Toronto Raptors at the end of the shot clock. I've been making this analogy.
Yep.
Yeah, you can get your regular season wins, but when playoff time comes and there's 5 seconds on the shot clock, who are you going to use their special ability to make a unique play? And I think that has to be proven with the Cowboy wideout. So until I see it, I'm not going to be sold on it.
Today is Friday, August 31st. This is the Cowboys Beat on CLNS Media. I'm Ari Temkin. The preseason is finally over. We are now officially in game week for the Dallas Cowboys as they look to open up the season against the Carolina Panthers. Today on the Cowboys Beat, we'll visit with Shan Shariff, host of the morning show with Shan and RJ on 105.3 The Fan. We'll get his insight into the Cowboys, what he projects out to be this season for the Dallas Cowboys. So Shan Shariff, make sure to stay tuned for that. But all preseason, as I've been hosting the Cowboys Beat, I've asked every one of our guests over/under 8.5 wins. Some have said under, some have said over, and they've given various responses. But for me, personally, I've always felt and maintained and said publicly that I think the over for 8.5. I predicted the Cowboys would win 10 games, 10-6. And I did this based on basically 2 things. The dominance of their offensive line, the return to dominance of their offensive line, and the running back. When you survey the history of the Dallas Cowboys, the recent history of the Dallas Cowboys, when they've had that great offensive line, and they've had that great running game with Zeke Elliott, they've been a top 5 offense. So that, and that alone, for me, was a reason to be optimistic about the Cowboys this season, to predict them to go 10-6, despite any question marks along the receiving corps, despite any question marks at the quarterback position, despite any question marks along the defense, despite any question marks with their schedule, which is tough. But as we've progressed further and further into the preseason, as the Cowboys have suffered injuries and illnesses, I found myself becoming less and less optimistic. I found myself vacillating between the 10-6 prediction that I made and another season passing with Jason Garrett without a playoff appearance. Now you might be asking why. What's made me vacillate? Why have I changed opinion? And the biggest reason for that is because you hope that an organization evolves and grows and learns from its previous mistakes. We've seen and been witnesses to the Cowboys making excuses for why they haven't made the playoffs, for why they've fell short. Injuries, questions of depth. Right? These are basic things that happen to every football team, no matter what level we're talking about, every single year. And yet the Cowboys find themselves creating exit ramps for them. Don't give yourself a reason for an excuse. Don't give yourself an exit ramp off the highway. Stay on the highway. Stay the course. Because the more reasons you give yourself for excuse, the more you are willing to take those excuses as legitimate. And I'm not talking about the fans. I'm talking about the team itself. That is a basic psychological principle, right? The more you tell yourself it's something, the more it becomes something. The more you make excuses for why you can't overcome these types of adversity, the more you can't overcome these types of adversity. I recall after the 3rd preseason game, as I'm hosting the post-game show on 105.3 The Fan, the Dallas Cowboys radio network, Jason Garrett was asked about his assessment of the backup quarterback, Cooper Rush. How'd he play? And Garrett, who consistently says that he's not a guy that's going to make excuses, then proceeded to make excuses. Well, I mean, he's I think he's played well despite the circumstances. He's been thrust out there with some questionable offensive line pieces and guys, and we're just trying to make it work, and yet on and on. all the while he's creating exit ramps for his backup quarterback, all the while he's giving his backup quarterback legitimate excuses for why he's not performing to the highest level. Whereas if he puts the onus on Cooper Rush, we just haven't seen much out of him that we've liked, but, we're behind Cooper Rush. He's the backup quarterback. There's a way to challenge a guy but inspire confidence in that person, and Jason Garrett didn't do that. The Cowboys have suffered some losses along their offensive line. Travis Frederick has GBS, Guillain-Barré syndrome. We don't know exactly how long he's going to be out for. I said last week on the podcast the Cowboys have to plan for him to be out the entire year. But at least what we've seen over the last week is more optimism from Travis Frederick. Zach Martin, the knee bruise. Tyron Smith is the bad back, but that they already knew. Joe Looney, in preseason week number 3, suffered a hand injury making a tackle. So there's questions about the depth on their offensive line. And look, I'm not going to say a legitimate excuse, but it's certainly something they couldn't have planned for as much. But when I hear the hems and haws from the Cowboys organization about their predicament at the safety position, I can't help but laugh. You can't complain and make excuses for your lack of depth at safety when you are culpable for that lack of depth at safety. When you do not address the position at all in free agency or in the draft, and then you suffer an injury, and all of a sudden it's like, we have no depth there. Well, that's the way football go. To steal a term from Ron Washington, the former manager of the Texas Rangers. You're going to have injuries. So to completely not plan at all for upgrades to the safety position and then complain when you've got guys injured and say, woe is us, this seems to me to be indicative of the Cowboys falling into the same trap every single year. And I waxed poetic on this last week, so I don't have to go down that road again, but it's just a reason why I'm not going to change my prediction from 10-6. I'm going to stick to it, but I vacillated on that prediction because of these particular things. The inability for this Cowboys organization to not make excuses for why things haven't gone their way, instead to just overcome those things and to completely demand the best out of their guys, their team, their organization, no matter the circumstance. That's what we want. We don't want excuses. We don't want you to say, woe is us, because we didn't put any draft capital or free agency into improving the safety position, and now all of a sudden it's like, now we need to scour the waiver wire when teams cut down their roster to 53 to find a new safety because we have nobody to play safety. We don't want that. We want you to make the best out of the lot that you have. Because in football, nothing, as I mentioned last week, will go as it's planned. Chaos is the only constant in football. Chaos is the only constant. So the teams that find their way through the chaos, that navigate the chaos, the organizations, the coaches that deal with that the best, these are the ones that win titles. Do you think that's the reason the Cowboys haven't played for an NFC championship in over 2 decades? Now, beyond the injuries and the excuses and the illnesses and all that stuff that's been constant here these last few weeks of the preseason, it's amazing to look at the ways in which the perceptions of this team has changed since I started doing this podcast in June. But the defense was a major question mark, and what we've seen this preseason is that this defense has as much talent and looks as good as we've seen from the Cowboys probably in the Jason Garrett head coaching era. Their front seven is robust. Their linebacking core is arguably the best positional group on the team, which is something incredible. If you had told me that, I would have said this in September, in June, I would have called you crazy. But there's also some perceptions of this team that have changed for the negative, which is I once thought that they'd be okay without a number one wide receiver. I thought that Zeke Elliott would be that quote-unquote number one guy, the guy that teams have to game plan for week in and week out. And I certainly think there's truth in that, but you the Cowboys are going to have to keep defenses honest. And, the situation that's been discussed ad nauseum around the Dallas Cowboys is, well, what are you going to do on a third down situation where teams are in cover one, which is everybody's in one-on-one on the outside except for Cole Beasley, who they're double and take away. So where do you go? Where do you go? Teams consistently go to their number one. That's a major question mark for this team. I'm not saying that Michael Gallup hasn't shown the ability to do that, but it's very rare that a rookie steps in and is a legitimate number one wide receiver in year one. And then, of course, the lack of a legitimate number one wideout, what will that mean for Dak Prescott? We've talked about creativity all offseason and the calls for Jason Garrett to be more creative and Scott Linehan to be more creative. The entire offseason, Scott Linehan and Jason Garrett and Stephen Jones and Jerry Jones, they all talked about, well, the problem is gone. Dez Bryant was the issue. He was the one that got in the way of our ability to be creative. We had, we had to account for him, so we couldn't be as creative. Well, we've seen them discuss creativity. We've seen parts of it implemented in training camp and in preseason games, but some of it appears to be sort of ridiculous, for lack of a better way to put it. I mean, in preseason week number 3, my co-host on the pre- and post-game show, Jesse Holley, former Dallas Cowboy, mentioned that they had Tavon Austin setting the edge as an outside receiver. Little 5'10" speedster Tavon Austin setting the edge as a receiver in the running game? You might not be surprised to learn that on that particular play, Patrick Peterson or whatever cornerback they have that's overpowering a 5'10" Tavon Austin is going to make the play. He's not going to be able to set the edge. Maybe that's just a preseason thing. Not trying to get anything on film, if you will. But I'm certainly less optimistic about the receiving core and their ability to be productive and to help out the running game and to help out Dak Prescott than it was earlier in June. And again, though I've become pessimistic seemingly by the day with this team, I'm still going to pick them to go 10-6. I'm still going to pick them to finish second in the division and get a wild card spot in the NFC because I'm continue to be optimistic about the return of Travis Frederick and what that will mean for the offensive line and what that will mean for Zeke Elliott in a dominant running game. As long as Dak Prescott has been the quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys, when Tyron Smith, Travis Frederick, and Zach Martin play and Zeke Elliott plays, they're a top 5 offense. And if they're a top 5 offense, they're going to win 10 games. I'm Ari Temkin. This is the Cowboys Beat on CLNS Media. You can check me out on Twitter. I am at Ari Sports, A-R-I Sports. Also, make sure to stream my live show every day at 12 noon Central Time on Phantom, the New World Order of Sports Media. Check it out at facebook.com/Watch Phantom. That's F-A-N-T-O-M. F-A-N-T-O-M. I do a Cowboy stream every single day at 12 o'clock Central at facebook.com/Watch Phantom. All right, coming up, I'm going to answer the question, is this defense for real? We'll get into that coming up. But now my guest this week on the Cowboys Beat is none other than Shan Shariff from 105.3 The Fan, Shan and RJ in the mornings. Shan, how are you doing, man? Thanks for the time.
I'm doing well. How are you, new Cowboys pregame host?
I'm doing well.
And postgame host.
I'm trying to fill your shoes. So, we've already had a couple of commenters and texters saying that I'm not you. So I think that's a good sign, right?
Well, when you fill in the morning, there's going to be texts saying, "Hey, don't come back, Shan." So it's going to work both ways. I wouldn't take it personally.
All right. Give me your optimism, pessimism on the Cowboys, Shan. This entire offseason was pretty optimistic, but I seem to be getting more and more pessimistic by the day.
Well, that's because of the injuries. You lose Xavier Woods, now you're freaking out at safety. You basically have one healthy guy left in Jeff Heath. Zach Martin gets a little bit banged up. He's good to go for Carolina, according to him. Obviously, the Travis Frederick situation is very scary. Up front with the defensive line, you're very excited, although you're going to have to count on Randy Gregory staying out of trouble with this, these Twitter rumors that are out there. You need a step up from Taco Charlton. You need Tank to repeat last year. You need Dorrance Armstrong to continue the strong camp, and then you need some from your defensive tackles. You put Tyrone Crawford back in there, but Jihad Ward had a week of flashing out in Oxnard. Haven't heard a ton about him since, and so yeah, we started off very, very positive and excited, and then the injury bug kind of hit, and my optimism is better defense, awesome Jalen Smith, Sean Lee stays healthy, fantastic pass rush. As some people are trying to put these DNs in terms of a pass rushing standpoint, in the top 3 or 5 in the league. And then Zeke just getting absolutely worked in terms of touches, more catches out of the backfield. You're going to have wide receivers that you don't feel a gun to your head to throw to, as Dak did with, Dez Bryant, to a degree, Jason Witten. So that's the optimism. The pessimism for me is, and I lean more towards this, teams are going to make the Cowboys, in my opinion, beat them throwing the football. Tony Romo said it the other day, when it's 3rd and 3 or when it's 3rd and 11, and you're going to go ahead and have one safety and blitz, and your guys on the outside, these unproven wide receivers, are going to have to go ahead and make a play to move the chains. And then, you talk about the secondary. It is exciting, but we need to see it from Xavier Woods. We need to see it from Kayvon Frazier. We need Jeff Heath to continue to play well. He was a joke here amongst Cowboy fans a couple of years ago. He's quieted that. And then talked about the questions with the defensive line, and you need Sean Lee to stay healthy as we wait for Leighton Vander Esch to go ahead and have improved health. So that's my optimism and pessimism for the Cowboys season.
So are you optimistic? Do you see this team as being a playoff team?
I'm 7-9. I'm 7-9. I was kind of with that before the Travis Frederick thing. The biggest egg that can be put on my face for this Cowboys season is Dak Prescott throwing the football to win down the field and on 3rd down. Now, a lot of people will say he doesn't have to sit there and be Aaron Rodgers. He doesn't have to throw it down the field with this run game. I am of the opinion the wide receivers are so unproven that people are just going to load up on Zeke. They're going to crowd the box, and they're going to make the Cowboys beat them throwing the football. And right now, I don't have tremendous confidence in that. So I'm kind of sticking at 7-9.
Do you think that will be attributable to a lack of a number one wide receiver, as you guys were talking about, as Romo was talking about as well?
Yes. I mean, you can have no names, but you have to have an elite special quarterback. Aaron Rodgers doesn't have to have technically a number one. Drew Brees doesn't, even though he has one now, Michael Thomas, and maybe with Jimmy Graham, like Drew Brees can elevate everyone else's game. He can make them that much better. Dak, in my opinion, is not on that level yet. And I know you can throw out all these teams who have made the Super Bowl, and Tom Brady sometimes has no-name wideouts, especially when Gronk is hurt. But again, he's Tom Brady. So, to me, it's kind of like a basketball team. The Toronto Raptors at the end of the shot clock. I've been making this analogy.
Yep.
Yeah, you can get your regular season wins, but when playoff time comes and there's 5 seconds on the shot clock, who are you going to use their special ability to make a unique play? And I think that has to be proven with the Cowboy wideout. So until I see it, I'm not going to be sold on it.
So going off of your prediction of 7-9, is that and the perhaps legitimate excuses of Travis Frederick and whatever else might befall this team, is that enough to keep Jason Garrett as the head coach of the Cowboys?
Ooh, great, tough question. I don't know. If everybody's healthy and you go 7-9, I think that can be enough to run them. I can also see Jerry being comfortable enough to go ahead and keep them. But I would guess if they're 7-9 that we're looking for a new head coach after this season.
Do you think they should get rid of Jason Garrett if he goes 7-9?
Yes. He's had long enough here. And maybe I'm so maybe I'm giving a quick answer to that because my co-host is like the only Jason Garrett defender left in the Metroplex and RJ Choppy. But I've seen way too much 8-8. I do respect Jason as a CEO/leader. But in terms of making a difference in in-game adjustments and figuring things out and, anything that, a hands-on coordinator would have to do as a head coach, I have zero faith. And it's going to have to be Scott Linehan. It's going to have to be Rod Marinelli that go ahead and save Jason's job, because in terms of in-game moves or any type of brilliant X's and O's strategy, I think Jason Garrett has shown us that he's not capable of that.
Sean, what's the outlook that you have on this division as a whole? Do you see the Eagles as the favorites to win this division? Do you have them winning the division? Do you expect the Redskins to be competitive? Do you expect the Giants to be competitive? What's your outlook on this division?
Well, I feel dumb answering this because nobody had Philly last year. I laughed at people who said, "Oh, Philly, they can sit there and be a playoff team." I'm like, based off of what? So I think you have to lean towards the Eagles. With Carson Wentz, I think he is absolutely the real deal. I know people try to compare him and Dak after a couple of seasons, but I think it's clear, and it should be clear, that Carson Wentz is the better player. He was, the number 2 overall pick. Philly's D is just nasty. I mean, no matter what happens on offense, I know Alshon Jeffrey's hurt, no matter what happens with their running game, they can rely on a top 5 defense that should be fantastic. The Redskins will probably be the Redskins, even though I think Alex Smith can provide more consistency than Kirk Cousins, even though they may not have as many big plays. And then the really intriguing team to me is the Giants. I can't stand Eli Manning, but they by far have the best weapons in the division. It's not even close offensively. And their defense before last year was looked upon as a top 5 defense in the league. So I think that the Cowboys and the Giants could have a little back and forth, a little tug of war between second and third in the NFC East, with the Redskins being last, because I'll never say anything good about the Redskins, so they actually show their dumpster fire of a front office and organization. And the Giants of all those could be intriguing. I'd probably have them third in the division just because my lack of faith in Eli.
All right, the Cowboys have a lot of question marks going into the season. What would you say is the biggest, most important question mark?
The biggest, most important question mark is Dak Prescott. It still comes down to the quarterback. I know that they're a run formula team. I know that they're a run-heavy team, and the health isn't looking fantastic right now, but what is going to happen when he faces pressure up the middle? I mean, Travis Frederick has not given up a sack in like 4 years. That's about to change until he hopefully comes back for this season. How is the new offense going to look, if indeed it is a new offense? Jerry Jones says he wanted that after last year, the predictability. We've had Dez Bryant and Bryce Butler say this is a very predictable offense. So Dak Prescott puts some of this team on his shoulders and win on third downs and win down the field to get people out of the box against Zeke. To me, the question mark is Dak before you have to make a decision on paying him.
Listen to Mornings with Shan and RJ on the home of the Dallas Cowboys, 105.3 The Fan, 5:30 to 10 a.m. Central Time every morning on 105.3 The Fan. Make sure to follow him on Twitter at 105.3SS. Sean, my man, thanks for your time, brother.
Thanks, man. Keep it up on the Cowboys pre and post.
The biggest surprise so far through this preseason training camp portion has been the defense for the Dallas Cowboys. And this is a team that has been built on offense. They have invested huge draft capital in their offense. They've now invested huge monetary assets into their offense, and in particular their offensive line. This team is seemingly built to win on offense. But it's hard to overlook the play of their defense in training camp, in the preseason. And, as I've mentioned before, correlation not necessarily always there. Sometimes guys have really good preseasons and then don't show out in the regular season, and vice versa. Sometimes they do. So it's not necessarily indicative of future success. But it's more than just one guy that we're talking about. What I find to be interesting, though, is, and maybe this is just the nature of football and because the average career of an NFL player is only 3 years, but I mean, you seem to have a situation in which you have these holes on offense, you plug those holes, and now you're fine. And the offense is rolling, and it's really, really good. So you then turn your attention from a personnel standpoint to the defense. You just start plugging up some holes there. But then all of a sudden, when you start to plug up holes on defense, now the holes burst forth on the other side from the offense. And again, and I'm not saying all of a sudden their offense is going to take a nosedive, but if you were to gauge their offense versus their defense through the preseason, their defense seems to be better and have more depth than does their offense. So it's very, very interesting. And as I mentioned before, the Cowboys, they don't need a top 5 offense and a top 5 defense. Super Bowl winning teams tend to have one or the other. They don't need to have both. But they look like they could be in position to have a top 5 and perhaps top 10 defense if we're being more realistic. So the question is this defense for real? We know DeMarcus Lawrence, it was fantastic last year, 14.5 sacks. So the question is, can they find somebody else from the right defensive end spot to really accentuate DeMarcus Lawrence? DeMarcus is going to get some double teams on the left side, so it's going to open up some opportunities on the right side. And we've seen a really good crop and rotation of pass rushers along the right side. Dorrance Armstrong's had a good camp, a rookie out of Kansas. And then, of course, there's Randy Gregory, who's had the best camp of all when it comes to guys that could play opposite DeMarcus Lawrence. So their pass rush certainly seems to be in good position. Now, Randy Gregory's situation is day-to-day, and he still has to go through rigorous reinstatement throughout the entire season. But, as long as he can stay on track and follow all of the guidelines he has to follow, the defensive line looks to be as good as it's appeared to be. The linebacking core, which, aside from the offensive line, is probably the best, deepest, most deepest positional group on the Dallas Cowboys. They're loaded at linebacker. So their front seven is legit, especially based on the play of Jalen Smith. Now, Jalen Smith's had a great camp, had a great offseason. I mean, this isn't just 1 or 2 weeks. This is the entire offseason, the progress he's shown. This was supposed to be a year that he could potentially take a major step forward when it came to his development. So, I certainly want to err on the side of caution when it comes to overt optimism on Jalen Smith. But as somebody that was completely negative on Jalen Smith and didn't think that he'd be able to be any more than an average linebacker at best in the NFL, he has completely outperformed expectations, and he, to me, is the key for that renaissance with that front seven. That front seven's legit, and then you get to the back end, there's questions at safety. It's one of the biggest question marks of the team, but their cornerbacks are loaded. When they're starting Chidobe Awuzie and Byron Jones at corners, Anthony Brown at nickel, plus they've got Jordan Lewis, who showed flashes at times last year as a backup, and Tarvarius Ward out of Middle Tennessee State. I certainly believe that this defense is as legit as it's appeared to be. This defense could certainly become as good as they've appeared to be throughout the entire preseason. So the question is, will the defense need to carry their offense? The biggest thing is, can the offense make plays, which we've talked about ad nauseum, down the field with the passing game? But can the defense, which has a lot of speed and looks to be considerably better than it's been probably in the Jason Garrett era, can they force turnovers? Can they get off the field on third down? Probably the two most important metrics for the success of this team and this defense overall. But if you're asking me if I think this defense is legit, it's hard to say it's not, considering this is multiple players playing at a very high level over an extended period of time, which are the types of things you look for when you talk about legitimacy going into the season. All right, next week we're going to be previewing the Cowboys and Panthers. The regular season is upon us. Cannot wait. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already. Make sure to give us a rating no matter where you're listening. Thank you for listening across the CLNS Media app, iTunes, Stitcher, and all the like. Also, make sure to check out my daily stream at facebook.com/WatchPhantom. Showtime airs at noon Central every single day. Again, at facebook.com/WatchPhantom. And I always love the feedback on Twitter. Shout out to John Nelson at Nello69, tweets at RE Sports. Just wanted to say I love the Cowboys Beat podcast from a fan in England. Keep up the great work. Thank you, John. Appreciate that. So tweet me at RE Sports, ARI Sports, with feedback, good or bad, at RE Sports on Twitter. All right, talk to you next week, but for now, I'm out. Peace.